The stress and autoimmune disease connection. Does stress cause autoimmune diseases like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis? And I think it's a little bit of a loaded question. So do I think that stress is the only thing that creates our autoimmune disease? I'm going to say probably not. I think there's a bunch of factors. It's almost like the perfect storm of things that cause us to get sick. And that could be such things as like a genetic component, let's just say an impaired liver. It could be our response to sugar, like blood sugar, like our how we handle sugar in our body, like insulin response, a whole bunch of things like that. But I definitely think it plays a very important and vital role. So I think it's definitely worth something. It's worth discussing. And I know when I was first diagnosed, I had no idea about any of this. I didn't understand anything about the connection to stress and our autoimmune disease. And I spent a lot of time reading, but sometimes it would confuse me a lot more. And sometimes I would read something and it would give me clarity. So I was trying to find a perfect balance of that. But what happened is I actually ended up reading a book, and the book is called You Are the Placebo by a dude named Joe Dispenza. And he does a really good job at keeping it simple and introduced me to a concept that was just very simple and easy to understand and easy to apply to a situation that will make sense on a surface level. So just to paint the picture here. So human beings are pretty much animals with a soul. And I'm just saying that for the sake of explaining this because it makes it easier. So you have let's say you have an antelope in Africa. Okay, you have a bunch of these antelope. They're all grazing and eating and enjoying life, just eating, surviving, living kind of thing. All of a sudden, a lion starts approaching them. What happens is the antelope starts feeling danger. It senses danger. So the antelope will look in the direction. All of a sudden, there'll be a flood of hormones. These stress hormones will kick in, and there'll be a response. So you get this kick. You might have a spike in insulin, a spike in cortisol. All of a sudden, the animal's thinking fight or flight. Okay, the antelope knows it has no chance at fighting a lion, so it says, "Hey, you know what? I got to get the heck out of here." So it's gonna go with the flight response. And what happens in that situation is that you pretty much have the blood in your brain and in your core it's pretty much going to your extremities. So it's going to your limbs to help you run away. So in that process, you get a little dumber. So your big brain pretty much gets rid of blood, and you're just primarily using your lizard brain. And the same thing, all the functions that are happening around your internal organs and your core and your stomach function, those things are also reduced to go to your limbs. Again, it's a complete response to help you get away and be more efficient in getting away. So in that process, if you're one of the lucky ones that gets away, bonus. If you're not, you're getting eaten and you're not really thinking about any of this. But if you happen to be one of those lucky ones and you get away, 15 minutes after that horrific experience, you'll be back grazing and eating and living. And I think that most animals in the world experience that, where they're in a state of just surviving, just living and surviving, where there's threats could be all around, but they're not constantly thinking about the threats. They're reacting to the threats. And that's when they're going through pretty much that fight or flight response. Where human beings are different is that we're constantly thinking about things. And when we're thinking, our thoughts create the same chemical responses, or the hormonal response from these. We're pretty much creating that same stressful chemical response that's happening to these animals, but our thoughts are creating this consistent cycle, this like feedback loop of being stressed out, of spiked cortisol, spiked insulin. So we go through those thoughts of thinking about the past, dwelling on the past, or worrying about the future. That could be just worried about something that we have to do, thinking about how somebody offended us, you name it. Could be your childhood, could be a lot of things. And I'm going to go into more detail in an upcoming video about some of that stuff. But the point is that thinking about things, our thoughts can control those hormones. And if you're living in a state of constantly jacked cortisol and insulin, those things are not very good. And those things have negative consequences in our health. So if you experience those things before you were diagnosed in your life, did they contribute towards your disease? Absolutely. Because we know that those psychological problems have physiological consequences, especially if they're endured for long enough. So they'll have negative consequences like probably impairing your immune system, impairing your gut flora and your microbiome, and pretty much just causing inflammation. So now, like, posing the question, like, how does stress actually affect your IBD? So, if you experience that stress for long enough, do I think that contributes towards you getting sick? Of course it does. Because now you have, like what I said before about that perfect storm. So you have this perfect storm, whether it's the genetic component, eating a bunch of garbage foods, toxins, you name it, and now you get this stress that pretty much, this stress is constantly impairing your immune system that's supposed to be protecting you. So now it's like the guard is down. Again, perfect storm, perfect situation to have this massive storm and get sick. So I think that stress has a really important role because it allows a lot of these things to happen. So if you didn't have the stress component, might you have had full-blown IBD? There's no way to know that, but possibly not. It's definitely something to ponder. But now back to the other question is, how does stress affect your IBD? So we know that if you're already diagnosed with an IBD, stress has negative impacts on your IBD. It probably causes more bowel movements and you to be sick more normally. If you think about just the average person, anybody that I know that is stressed out, that's worried or nervous or anxious about problems or situation in their life, anybody can get diarrhea or have an upset stomach. And for people with IBDs, where that's pretty much our weakest link is our gut, we get that more. We get that a lot worse than they do. So we definitely know that can affect, if it can affect a normal person's gut, it definitely affects somebody with impaired gut function. So yeah, stress is definitely going to have a negative impact on your health. Like I said, psychological stress is definitely going to have physiological consequences. So that can be feeling crappy, having more bowel movements. Can it put you into a flare? Absolutely. Extreme stress can put people into flares. And speaking to people over the years, I've constantly asked people about stress before flares, and they told me that they were in stressful situations and it pretty much led them into a downward cycle that ended up with them in bad flares. So do I think that stress contributes towards us getting diagnosed? Yes, I do. And I also think that it contributes towards our daily health with our IBDs. So it can negatively impact our IBDs on a daily basis, pretty much prompting more symptoms and creating more symptoms in our life. And what I'm going to do in my next video is I'll actually talk about what you can do to pretty much how you can reduce this stress and how you can deal with this stress to improve your life so you're not affected by these things. So again, this is my first video of this series. Hopefully it's added some value. My next video will actually provide some solutions that you can use on a daily basis, how to handle that stress. Thanks so much.
Are you tired of feeling crappy? Get my free healing guide. Tips, tweaks, and hacks. Click the description for more information.